In this video, I'll take a deeper look into some of the variations in the two knights defense, and in particular in the Ulvestad variation, which arises after these opening moves. I'm going to look at b5. And in this video, I will examine the perhaps most natural capture that white has here, which is d takes on c6. This move is not the best move, it cannot be recommended, but it's very natural. And if you play b5 as black, you're likely to encounter this, as this is what your opponents might try. So the downside of this natural capture is that black gets to take the bishop on c4, and this bishop was playing a very important role in pressuring f7. Without it, this knight on g5 also doesn't have much of a purpose, and even though black is currently down the pawn, he will gain further time by either attacking this knight or just taking advantage of its position differently. Because black has these two pawns, white cannot just let them be there. They're preventing white from developing his pieces in a normal way. So the most reasonable try here for white is to try to win these pawns. So the only critical move here is really queen e2, attacking both pawns, and this is the only variation where black really needs to know what to do. In other cases, his play is very natural and doesn't need much explanation. So if we're to build an opening repertoire based on 5b5, we need to know here what to do. I recommend a move that is in the spirit of this variation, which is to further sacrifice material and go for fast development as soon as possible. So I suggest to move pawn to h6, immediately forcing the white knight to commit to either retreat to f3, to go to e4, or, as white most likely will do, is to capture with a check. It's really hard to resist the capture with check. So usually white takes here on e5. Black has to block, and now the knight has to go somewhere. It can retreat either to f3 or to e4. So these are the only critical options. The main line is knight to f3. I will quickly examine what happens if he goes to e4. There isn't much of a difference here in terms of what black should do. He should finish his development, and as an example, I will show what happened in one of my games. Here, black basically begins to play with his rooks on the two open files, the e file and the b file. The tension already with the queen and the rook on e8 is a little bit uncomfortable for white, but in my game he continued development, and at some point in this variation black should go for a kingside attack, and this was a good moment, keeping more pieces on the board. I avoided an exchange on e4 and instead played knight to g4, eyeing either f2 or h2. The queen retreated to d5, offering an exchange of queens, which is of course not acceptable. Taking advantage of the pin along the e file, black can play bishop to d6, and if white goes to h3 like he did in the game, black can sacrifice a piece. It's very dangerous for white to take on g4, and also there's a threat of knight to f2 immediately. So immediately after 14 moves, black gets a very strong attack here. h3 is also a weakening move in other ways, as we'll see. White try to cover up f2. Black further attacks the white queen. The queen leaves further on to the side of the board, and now a very forcing move, but at the same time one that is critical and it needs to be played, because the knight is hanging after the bishop is captured, but it turns out that black has enough play here, and the attack continues. Currently black is down a lot of pawns, but and it seems like the knight on f1 is doomed, but things are not so simple. If the knight is captured, then probably bishop to h3 would follow. So instead white tried to develop his pieces, but then came another sacrifice. And again in this variation, black plays for rapid development, opening of files, and attack against the white king. and another sacrifice followed, and now black is winning because he's giving checkmate to the white king. So very important to kind of understand the basic ideas, and this game illustrates those ideas reasonably well. Play isn't all that different in case of the other response, knight to f3. Black still goes for the kingside attack, just slightly differently. After both sides castle short, black develops a bishop and threatens to take on f3, doubling white's pawns and weakening his king. White tries to cover up the important squares with queen to f4. Black's play is very natural, just attack the white queen, and now double the pawns and weaken the white king. Here is the main idea that black needs to know. The rest of the play is mostly natural. This is slightly subtle. So black goes rook to b8, and now the rook is threatening to enter the game via b4. White tries to cover up b4 with pawn to a3, and then comes an attack. And there's really two ways to develop the attack here. If you want to play in a practical way, there's nothing wrong with playing queen to c8, and here black has a pretty dangerous attack, a winning attack. If you want to play for some pretty moves, I would recommend to play rook to b5 here. The rook is being sacrificed, and we'll see why. The immediate threat is rook to h5 or rook to g5. So white takes naturally, and then black plays knight to d5, again freeing up the route for the queen to come to some of these squares, and of course also blocking off the white queen from coming back. The most natural question is what happens if he takes on d5, because the knight is en prie. Then black wins a queen and has at least a draw here, in my opinion. The white king is very weak, and the material count doesn't matter all that much. White is completely undeveloped, so black is probably better here. After knight d5, white instead tries to transfer the queen back to the king's side, while the rest of his army is really not moving much from the first rank. Again, the same theme of cutting off the white queen from the king's side, where the action is taking place. Again, bringing the queen to the king's side is the main idea, and I'll just quickly show how this variation concludes. It seems like white has defended against all the key threats. g2 is covered, f3 is covered, but black still has time to bring the last piece into the game. It is coming to g6, and if the rooks are exchanged, there will be nobody in white's army to defend g2 or f1. So exchanging the last defensive piece is the key idea here. And the last combination that black throws here is the queen sacrifice, leaving the queen under attack on h3. Allows this checkmate. There's a couple of threats. There's rook to here, and there's also knight to here that are both threatened, and white is unable to stop. So the likely conclusion of this is something like this. Okay, so we have covered some opening theory here with pawn to b5 move and this recapture. But we have also covered some ideas in terms of what black should do, which is he should play for rapid development and attack the white king after finishing his development. Of course, it is harder for white to finish his own development because these pawns have not moved here, and it takes time to get them going, and because of the rest of white's pieces are slightly uncoordinated, with the knight on g5 hanging without the support of the c4 bishop, that piece is also causing white some problems, and white has to spend further time getting this piece out of the way, and ultimately black has nothing to fear in this line. We'll continue with the other responses to b5 in the other videos.